Hi, and welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. I'm so glad you're joining me as we're continuing in this study that we're doing, this series on science versus the Bible, science and the Bible. It's a fascinating study. If you've been following these, I hope you have found them very entertaining and interesting and informative, because there's so much information in the Bible concerning science, though the Bible is not a science textbook. I mean, I've said that from the first introduction. It's not a science textbook, but what is science that is contained in the Bible is always going to be accurate. Though science disagrees with it, in some cases for centuries, they eventually come around and see, you know something, the Bible was right all along. And that's what we're going to see with this one. In this lesson, as we are continuing and coming to a close nearly now in this series, we're going to be talking about psychology in the Bible. Psychology in the Bible. Now, there's two sciences that really have disagreed. Some of the famous psychologists of the 1800s and even the early 1900s totally disagreed with what the Bible was, and said that, you know, belief in God and belief in the Bible and stuff was paramount to almost being insane in some cases, or at least very immature. That was used more as an escape of anything else. Well, the science of psychology has come a long way since Dr. Freud, and there have been a lot of things that have been discovered just in the latter part of the 20th century, and now even into the beginning of our 21st century. We're seeing so many new things, and the thing is, they fit with what the Bible says. So we're going to take a look at some of these. Now, as we do this, there is, like I say, so much information about psychology, which is a newer science now. It's not like some nutrition things that go back for a long time or whatever. Psychology is more of a new science, and starting more in the 1800s and really starting to grow leaps and bounds in the early 1900s. But the Bible is a collection of books that date back all the way to 1450 BC, so 3,400 years ago. And the data that is in here, in some cases, dealing with psychology, has been overlooked for centuries. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the last time sitting in a church service and listening to a pastor talk on psychology in the Bible. I do remember one time when I was in high school, this taking place, and a lot of what the pastor was saying at this revival or some event thing that I was at was actually contrary to some of the stuff that actually was found in some psychology books. So there's been a lot of misinformation going on. And also, psychology has been evolving. I was scary about using that word because some people just turn me off when I say evolution or evolving, but it does. Science sort of does change as time goes on. They're incorrect, and then they find things that are correct. You know, for many centuries, science will say that this is, and we've been seeing this through the series, that this is what is true. Science is truth. And then they find out science was wrong all along, and we have to change our science books. I mean, that's just what science is. It's constantly making changes. It's the most changing thing it seems like there is. And in today, what we're going to do is look at this Bible that we have, because what is psychological and for health science found in the Bible is actually really true today. And it gives us good health. And as we've seen in the series, science has many times been at odds with the Bible. But this is really interesting, because what God wrote, our perfect God, what he wrote in this, it's inspired. He gave this information to people, and they wrote this down, and it's so accurate. It's just fascinating. So we must remember now that the original authors of the Bible didn't come up with this stuff on their own. Our Bible is not manufactured by men, which some skeptics and critics say, that it was just different people writing this. They just got up one morning and started writing. No, that is not true. The Bible is very clear in many passages saying that this was coming directly from God. God's inspiration on men, and then men wrote these things down. So if God wrote it, and he's a perfect, holy God, what he's going to write in there, because he can't be found with error, he doesn't make mistakes, it's going to be true. And that's what we're going to see as we do this lesson here. This is so exciting to see things on psychology. Now, in all honesty, I am not a psychologist. I'm not even a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist. I have taken some classes. I have taken counseling courses and stuff, but I in no way am saying that I am an expert in this. I've done a lot of reading, and I'm going to quote a lot of passages as we do this. I'm not going to give you my own interpretation of what psychology says. We're going to go through quoting different things and from different books and different periodicals and peer journals as we do this. But that's how we're going to take a look. We'll look at the Bible, what it says, then we'll look at what science, the science of psychology goes through. Now, for the subject of psychology, or emotional science, or if we want to say, we can call it mental health, there are too many numerous passages, too many passages in the Bible to cite in this one lesson that we're doing. It's sort of like the nutrition lesson that we did before. There's just so much there. Well, we can't do it all. One could actually do a whole semester's course in a college, a 5-hour course, specifically just on psychology and mental health from the Bible. So we aren't going to be able to cover the entire content, but we will cover some major areas. And we'll divide this up primarily into 2 subtopics. What we find basically in the Torah, the Pentateuch, the beginning part of the Bible, the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. But then we're going to look more a little bit later on with primarily looking at Proverbs. And we're not even going to get into much in the Psalms. This lesson would just get way too long. But we will look at Proverbs, the book of wisdom, and a book that was written actually for teens. The only book in the Bible specifically written for young people, the book of Proverbs. And we'll take a look at that and the wisdom that is in there. And that's how we'll conclude this series. So with this, as I said, we're going to start with the Torah first of all. And as I've said many times already, I've been following this series. The Torah was written by Moses around 1450 BC, somewhere in there. And to study mental health, one way I want to approach this is let's take a look at the guy who's writing this from God, who's actually penning this. When God is telling him, write this down, he's the one doing it, and that's Moses himself. Now, Moses, the Bible tells us, was 120 years old when he died. After growing up in Pharaoh's palace, living in the palace for 40 years, then he lived in the wilderness for 40 years, and then he led the people of Israel out, the Hebrew people, out of Egypt, up to the borders of the Promised Land for the next 40 years, and then he died. So taking a look at this man's life, because he was a very special person, and his death is recorded in the book of Deuteronomy towards the end of that book, but it also gives us a clue about mental health by looking at his character. And that's what I want to take a look at. The character of Moses, because this guy was, no matter how you look at it, this guy was successful, very successful. And I want to show you how he is described at death, because that's going to tell us a lot about what his life was like. In Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 7, out of the English Standard Version, we're going here, it reads, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. Okay, what does that mean? Actually, he was in really good health. At 120 years old, he was still strong. He could still see well. I can't read a book or anything without a pair of glasses nowadays, because I've reached into the years of 64 years old now, and I can't read without having glasses up close. Distance I can see fine, but I can't see things up close very well. Everything's blurry. Moses didn't have this problem. He wasn't wearing spectacles or anything. This is giving us a lot of information about what this guy was like. And if we study his life, wow, we learn a lot. How this guy was. Because, like I say, most geriatric men, when they die, if they get to live to 100 years of age, let's be frank, their physical and mental attributes are not very well pronounced. In short, they're sort of deficient. Some people lose much of their mental health capacity decades before even reaching the age of 100, if they even come close to living that long. Apparently, Moses was not like this. He was healthy mentally and even physically up to his death. He continued to lead the nation of Israel for 40 years, right up to his death, and through some of the absolute worst conditions imaginable. This guy was successful. And we can learn a lot about psychology by studying what's written about this guy's life. For instance, during those last 40 years, as he's leading the Hebrew nation through the wilderness, he puts down rebellions of the people and his family, his own family. He fights wars. He stood up to many people, of his own people even, trying to plot his own death and trying to plot his murder. He faced extreme situations like hunger, thirst. They're out in the desert and stuff. Constant complaining from the people. And he died with the greatest respect of the people. They mourned for him for a long time. How did this guy do all this? How was he so successful with all of these threats, with all of these problems? You'd think this guy would be under such stress, emotional stress and anguish, but he doesn't. How does he handle his emotions? What drove this man? And that's what we're going to see. And we're going to learn from the psychology of this guy and what we can apply to our lives. It's so interesting because we get a clue to his mental health by what he wrote for God himself, who spoke to Moses. It says God spoke to Moses face to face and told him what to write down for the people. And in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, it reads, "Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friends." I mean, what kind of relationship did they have? But you see, they're talking face to face. Moses speaks to God and God speaks to him. Wow, what Moses learned from the almighty, eternal, omnipotent God is recorded in the Torah. And some of the basic facts that science now agrees is healthy for people is found here. So let's explore what Moses was telling us as we go through these scriptures and see what we can learn from psychology and how psychology agrees with the Bible on this. First of all, let's begin with number one. Moses maintains a good character. Throughout all of this, he maintains, as he's leading these people, he maintains a good character. That's something we should learn, to maintain a good character. Much of Moses' success can be traced directly to the character that he developed over the years. Now, he came from a formal training. I mean, he went to, Pharaoh High School, Amenhotep High School or something like this. He graduated with honors at Pharaoh University. I mean, he was raised in all of this with very, very formal training that he received in the court. So he had the best education that was available at that time anywhere in the world. He had the best education. And much of it was also learned after this, when after he turned 40, he learned a lot more stuff. Some examples of these character traits that I'm talking about are, for instance, and we can learn from this too, Moses prayed. Prayer was a big part of Moses' life. Moses prayed. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 13, it talks about Moses talking to God and praying to God. Talking to God, that is prayer, folks. Prayer has been studied by many major universities and medical research facilities and has been found to be very beneficial to one's health. A 2009 study by Koenig and colleagues found that 6 weekly in-person Christian prayer sessions with patients at a primary care office lowered their depression and anxiety symptoms and increased their optimism. This is recorded in the International Journal of Psychiatry, which was published in this issue in 2009. It was volume number 39. And they talk about this. The title of this article was "A Randomized Trial of the Effect of Prayer on Depression and Anxiety." Prayer does, and there's more studies that we could post, but we could stand here for an hour doing this. There are so many studies that show that prayer does help with depression and anxiety and increases our optimism. Moses was one that prayed. And having a description of his end life being as good as it was, I mean, prayer must be a key to this. So this helps with psychology, and psychology now shows this is being true. Prayer is found in Scripture in practically every book. Jesus himself instructed and taught his disciples to pray. To list all the verses in the Bible talking about that we should pray, it's going to take too much time. It's in there. But I will, just mention, Jesus himself taught the disciples to pray and told them to pray. Did this on numerous occasions. So that's one thing that we can learn directly from Moses. In developing a good character and a good life, we should pray. We should take time and talk with God and listen to God. Second, trust in the Lord. Now you might be thinking, these are psychological objectives? Yes, they are. As we look at this, because I'm going to show you how these things all relate through psychological papers, professionally published papers that support all this, trusting in the Lord. Moses trusted in God in Exodus chapter 15, verse 2, specifically says this, that Moses was constantly putting his trust in God. Throughout the Exodus, with all the problems they were having as they left Egypt, Moses kept putting his trust in God, even when it didn't make sense. To go to the border of the Red Sea with the Egyptian army behind you, and God says, don't worry. All these Egyptians you see, you're not going to ever see them again. You're going to take your staff and you're going to strike the water and I'm going to make a path for it. It didn't even make sense scientifically, but Moses trusted God. Well, doctors at Mayo Clinic published in the Mayo Clinical Procedure, volume 76 in the year 2001, an article called Religious Involvement, Spirituality, and Medicine, Implications for Clinical Practice. And they did this, and what they found, these Mayo Clinic doctors basically published this paper indicating that many health benefits come from specifically trusting God. I mean, these doctors from Mayo Clinic are generally pretty well respected. And these doctors here actually write an entire paper about this. And there's more papers that you can read on this, but this is a fascinating one showing that this takes place. Let me give you another one. A third thing that we can learn from Moses and his character building, courage and support of others. Courage and support of others. Now, Moses, and I think most people who study this book, Book of Exodus and the others will see, Moses is a true leader. This guy is leadership material. He's one of my favorite Bible characters, and he is a great leader. He was also, if you see and read his story, he is also a protector of the people who were being threatened. Matter of fact, he was a little overzealous at one time because one of his Hebrew neighbors was being oppressed by an Egyptian. He kills the Egyptian. So he goes a little overboard at times, but he really does care about the people. That's the key thing. He cares about people. He sees an injustice and he stepped in. Well, recent medical studies have shown that helping others in distress aids in our own mental health. There's a great article written, you can pull this off online, Mental Floss, and it's actually entitled Scientific Benefits Helping Others. It's from mentalfloss.com. It's a fantastic article you can read, and about how if we help others, it actually, by helping others, we help ourselves. We help our own mental health. You ever done that? You ever go and help somebody out? The nice feeling you get afterwards, it makes you feel better. You feel really energetic and stuff, and you feel like, wow, I've accomplished something really good. I helped my fellow neighbor and stuff. Yeah, we should do that. Another point that Moses does that we can learn from in psychology is the compassion and meekness. Moses was compassionate, and he was a meek, a very humble person. And he understood, and he felt compassion of others, and he understood others. And he supported them, and he defended them who didn't understand. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3 gives an example of this, how Moses supports people and defends people. Oh my gosh, there's been so many medical papers that show evidence of this. One produced by Berkeley, entitled, Should We Train Doctors for Empathy? By a Dr. Jill Suttie, psychiatry. She writes a paper showing the benefits and evidence that expressing empathy to others leads to mental health benefits for us. By doing something good for others, we help our own mental capacity. We should do better. We should help people. And in doing so, we help ourselves in a way. Fantastic paper on this.